it's a pleasure for me to be here. Today I will be talking about the UI design for the .NET MAUI. As you know, it's a topic that I really love. So for today we will be speaking a little about that. But first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Leomaris Reyes, a student in Platzi, software engineer from the Dominican Republic. I'm also Microsoft MVP for 4 years in a row. I'm a content editor. I usually write about Xamarin and .NET MAUI, and I also have my baby, that is my blog, AskSami.com, which I also wrote about Xamarin and .NET MAUI. For me, it's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, I want to introduce the two main goals that I want to get in this presentation. The first is that I want to teach you some tips to improve your SAML skills. And the second is that I want to explain a little UI replicator, and I want to analyze briefly its code, each of the blocks that I will be developing here. So how we will be divide these goals? The first is that I will be teaching you the tips for selecting a UI to practice. As we know, it's too important to continue practice to improve our SAML skill in .NET MAUI, or in Xamarin that it's the same. So the second point is that we will be starting analyzing a real UI with the code in Visual Studio, and this point is subdivided in two. The first is how to start coding a UI to replicate, and the second is analyzing the code to build this UI. And the last one, but not the least important, is how can I continue practice my SAML skills. So, knowing that, let's start. First of all, I want to give you some tips for selecting a UI to practice. For me, practice is one of the main or the most important points to be better and to improve your SAML skill or whatever skill that you want to improve. So now the first tips is that you have to select a UI that challenge you. That is my first recommendation. Don't stay in the comfort zone. But I know that you are thinking about how to do it. I don't know how to do it. Okay, I have three important points here. The first is that you have to select a UI that contains controls that you have never used. A controls, I don't know, for example, oh my god, this UI have a circle button. I don't know how to do it. I don't have an idea. That's the right UI that you have to select. And the second point is that you have to pick one that you are afraid to replace to. Oh my god, I don't know. I don't have an idea how to replicate this UI. I don't know how I will start. So that's the right UI that you have to select, because it will be keeping you challenged you. And the third point is that you have to identify some techniques that you have not applied. For example, the overlapping is a simple technique, but sometimes we don't know how to do it. So if we continue practicing and repeating this way, we will be applying this in a natural way. And the second tips is the better for me, is that you have to select a UI that you like and then inspiring you. For example, in my case, I look for UI that have a colors that I love. For example, I use to find some UI that have a pink, blue, or purple colors, for example. And besides that, I use to select themes that identify me. It's too important that. And of course, with modern designs. So, keeping in mind this previously point, I want to start. Here I have a slide which indicates that we'll be starting to analyze a UI. In this case, I add a QR code which blog posts that have exactly the same explanation that I will be doing here. The name is Replicating Course UI Profile in .NET MAUI, which you can scan and continue analyzing. So here I have been selecting a UI that I really love, which is too simple. It's a profile UI. This about a course, online course. In this case, I want to divide into blocks. But why I want to do it? Okay, sometimes when we have a UI that we don't know, have an idea about how to start, I think that is one of the better tips, divide into blocks. I have here divided in three blocks. Why? Because it will be allow me to seek in blocks And don't be abrumated about what do I have to do. The first is the timeline. As you can see, the timeline block is composed by two images. The first is a background image that it's here is the timeline. The second is an image profile that is a rounded image and is followed by the name of the profile owner and a basic information such as location, age, and a simple status. So let's continue with the second block. This is too simple. It's the description block. In this case, we have an Angelica's notes that is a title from a text and following by the description about this note. This is just an example. For example, Aidan, $8, and so on. And the third and the last block is for me one of the most important because it's composed by different controls, is the homework. In this case, is composed by a homework title and a collection of homework. As you can see, you have inside different frames, different homeworks that you have to do in your profiles. We have an image and we have the name of this homework, but it's a set of information. To do it, we will be using a collection view. We will be seeing this in the next slide. And this is followed by the line. With this live, we will be exploring different ways to do it. And the last are two buttons, that is the premium button and the get dial buttons, just to do an action that the user wants to do. So keep in mind, please, these three blocks, and that's how we will be developing this UI. But first, I want to give you some different tips that you have to keep in mind. The first is that we have previously been done is divide your UI in different blocks. The second is that you have to identify the main layout that is better for your application. But I don't know, what is the main layout? The main layout is the layout that will be cover all the design or all the code that you will be writing inside your UI, inside your design. That's why it's important to analyze what is the better decision. I used to use the grid because it's providing me the one of the better performance for my UI, but that's not always the best UI to use. So it's important to analyze what is the best. And the third is that you have to make sure to do your test on all the available platform of your app from the first moment. Please don't start just testing on iOS or just testing in Android. Please test in both because it will be helping you to save a lot of time and to be your code up to clear from the start. And knowing that, let's start with the first block. Here, we will be starting to analyze the code that will be present in my Visual Studio 9. But first, I want to highlight some important points. Here, as you can see, we have different controls that we have to build and that we have to add. For me, the most interesting are both. The first is that we have an image that is the timeline, it's a background image with a rounded corner, as you can see here. This is one of the most important tips to doing in XAML. And the second is that you have an image profile which is rounded. So how to do it in XAML? It's too easy, but I want to highlight this because sometimes we don't know how to do it, or we just to build, I don't know, some custom renders, and it sometimes isn't necessary. And following by this control, you also have the name of the profile owner and the different basic information. Here, I have added some Git's code, which contain exactly the code, the XAML code that you must use to replicate this UI. Here you have the portion of the timeline, and here you have the rounded image. But let's start with our Visual Studio to analyze this code that I have previously provided. The first is, first off, start with the first block. I want to stop with the main layout. I don't know if you remember what I was speaking about. What is the main layout that I have to choose? In this case, I have been choosing the grid. I have a grid with a row definition, with the count that I need, and I have been adding a padding. So before that, I have to continue developing the block. The first block is composed by the timeline picture, the image profile, the profile name, and the general description. Let's start with the timeline. The timeline here, I just added a frame to get the effect with rounded border. So the frame is too important to get it. But how beside a frame? Okay, as you can see, I have been adding the different properties that I need. For example, a border color, vertical option, height request, and so on. But here we have some key properties that you don't have to forget. The first is the is clipping to out that must be in true. And the second is the padding with zero. And of course, don't forget to add the corner values with the value that you want to add to your corners. So this is the frame that you want to include this image. So how can I add the image? With this simple line of code. Inside the frame, you just have to add the image with the source, that is the name of the picture, in this case is timeline, and with the aspect that you need. And with this simple line of code, you have already this first image that is the background. But I want to stop here to explain a little about the image source name. In this case, as you see, I have been adding the name is lower letters. Please keep in mind that to avoid some problem with the naming and the convention needed of some platforms. And continue with the image profile. I will be also working it with a frame. Please don't forget the same properties that I have previously mentioned, such as is clipping to bound and padding with zero. But to get a perfect rounded image, I also need some additional property. Oh, but which are these? Okay. The first is that you have to include both width and height requests with exactly the same value. But also you have to add the corner radius property. But in this case, you have to add exactly the half of the values previously added. This will be allowing you to create a perfect rounded image or button or what do you need. In this case, it's an image. And once you have that, you just have to include inside this frame what is the image which you want to be rounded. In this case, is mobile profile. So at this time, we have both the background alignment and the profile image. So let's continue with the following controls. The first is that we have here the name of the profile owner. This is a simple label which is located in our line of the grid. I have the text, I have the font attributes as bold, I have the text color that I need, and the horizontal text alignment with a margin and a font size. As you can see, it's a simple label that is located to replicate the names of the owner. So let's continue with the basic information that is this portion of code. Here, I have different ways to do it. In this case, as you can see, I will return, you have a set of information. You have your location, you have your age, and a status. You have, for example, the option to do it with a collection view if your information will be dynamic. But you also can include it in a simple way, as I did here, that is in a grid. So I leave you some different options. It's depending of what is the scenario that you have and what is your needs. Here, I add a grid, a simple grid, and inside this grid, I have been adding different controls. In this case, I have been adding a button with an image source that has as a name a location. I have also a label with the location. In this case, is Venice, Italy. I have also a button with an age, with an image source with the name, and I add all the properties that I need, such as margin, width request, height request, corner radius, and so on. And I also have a label with the text of the age, and finally a button with the status. So with this portion of code, I just have finished my first block, and I will return, and this is the result. It's too simple to replicate. You just have to follow which are the most important properties that you have to add and which are the right layout to add in this case. So I will continue with the second block. In this case, I also have added a Git's code, which you can scan and we'll see your Git's portion of code. In this case, we just want to add a title and a description. It's too simple. I will return to my Visual Studio and I will locate it with my title. My title in this case is Angelica's Notes and is a simple label which contains some different properties. For example, font attributes, text color, horizontal text alignment, margin, and font size in that case. I want to remember that for some cases, and I prefer to use it when I have different projects to go to production, for example, or in my job. I used to use styles because with the styles, I can just wrapping up all these properties in just an style and I can reuse it. And I will be saving different line of code, some lines of code, just doing. So keep in mind. I will continue with the description. That is also a simple label which is located in the row 5. And I here just need an horizontal alignment that is a start and a font size and the text that I want to show on my UI. And with this line of code, I just have replicating this part of my UI. I will return here and these two lines of code have been replicating exactly this part of our UI. So I will continue with our final block to finish our amazing UI. In this case, I want to highlight two important points that we will be exploring here. The first is that we will be exploring or using our collection view with the homework list in this case. And finally, we will be also using lines. We will be creating lines. And you will see that we have different options to do it. Here I also add the version of code, both the tilting and tag list, and with the line and final buttons. Let's return to Visual Studio. And here I want also to breaking down the explanation of this line of code. The first is that I have a label with the title about the homework. I have the text, I have the font attributes, text color, and horizontal alignment, a margin, and font size. Once I have been adding the title, I want to start with a collection view. Why do I use a collection view here? Because it's a set of information that can be dynamically changed. So if I just add a collection view, I will be avoiding just to use hard code of my code. And this is too important to make my application scalable. So taking in count this, I want to start with my collection view code. Here I have been adding the basic structure about a collection view. As you can see, I have been adding an item source with some example information. I have been adding the items layout. Here is important to add that you want the horizontal weight about your list because if you don't add it, will be with a vertical weight by default. So I have been adding the collection view inside an item template, following by the data template, and inside here, I have been adding an stack layout. This stack layout has inside a frame. This frame is because, as you can see here, we have a list with a different square with rounded corners. So the frame allows us to do it. That's why I have been adding here. So I have a frame. Just don't forget to add the corner radius. For example, the border color. If it has a shadow or not, in this case, no, and add an horizontal option. Inside this, we need a layout. In this case, I have add a grid with two row definitions. And inside this grid, I just need two different controls. The first is an image with a folder source. and with the head request and the head request. And this is followed by a label that will be containing, as you can see here, the file name that is binned. Binned because, as I told you before, you can include this information in a dynamic way, and it will be allowing you to save time. So once you have added this test, you can also add some different properties such as font size and text color. And with this explanation, we have been finished exactly the collection view. The collection view, as I told you, is exactly the same with the set of homework that this profile has. But let's continue with another control that is also important, that is the box view. The box view is representing the line, the gray line that you see in this UI. I will stop here because I want to tell you that you have different ways to do it. In this case, I have been adding with a box view, but you also can use the line with the change, for example, about .NET MAUI, and this is an amazing decision. So I just want that you see different ways to do it. In this case, I have been adding a box view with an horizontal option. And don't forget the head request that must be small, because if it's a line, you have to replicate a line. I have been adding a margin and the color that is also too important to display your line. And finally, I want to explain the two buttons that are at the end of the UI. Here, I have added a grid to include this button inside this grid because it has two columns, and I prefer to do it at the end and just to avoid to add two column more if I don't need in the previously block. So that's why I add this grid. And inside this grid, I have the two buttons. I have the first, that is a premium button with its background color, with its image source, with its quit request, corner radius, and font size with the text color, and all the properties that you need. And also, that is the final line of code, I have the get detail buttons. Here, please don't forget to add the corner radius, the text color, the background colors, and the font attributes. It will be helping you to replicate exactly as you need to be replicate this UI. So with this portion of code, we have been explaining and learning about how to do the third block, that is here's. And now you have exactly the complete UI that you need, in this case, in XAML. So the final result, if you run this code that you can scan here, you will see a result like this. As you can see, we have it in vertical line or in horizontal way. So as you can see, in both are too beautiful. And you can test it also in Android and all the platform that you need. And here we have been finishes, but first of finish, I want to include some important tips. In this case, I want to speak a little about how can I continue practice my XAML skill, because this is too important to continue growing up in the NET MAUI or in your career. I have exactly 3 points that I want to speak with you. The first is that please don't miss the news about .NET MAUI and the contribution of the community. You have the Microsoft blog and different blogs and contribution and open source contribution that you can just take a look. Please be up to date, keep reading about all the amazing news that you have. It's too important to continue growing up in your career. The second is that you have to be inspired by board. And in this case, I have added an example like Dribble that I really love. And you can replicate different UIs, different designs that Dribble have, or other portals that have the same facility that Dribble. But please keep practice your XAML, replicate the UI, and remember all the tips that I have previously mentioned in the starting of this presentation. And finally, take a look of the smpbts.com. That is a website to see different options to play with your XAML. Here you will see different way of thinking about Xamarin, how to do different UI in Xamarin. So they will be helping you to learn and to growing up about your thinking about how to replicate a UI. So don't miss it. And thank you so much for being. Has been a pleasure, a big pleasure to be here. I hope that this presentation will be too useful for you. If you need something, please contact me by my Twitter, my LinkedIn, or even my blog. And I also added the same QR that I have been adding in the when we start this presentation. If you want to scan this QR, and you will be exactly the same explanation, but in this case in a writing way, which I hope to help you a lot. So thank you so much, James.